You are listening to Boise Fire Mission Strong podcast, where we share stories from the field, public safety knowledge, and give an inside look into the Boise Fire Department. Here's your host, Fire Chief Mark Niemeyer.
Today we're joined by three outstanding leaders of the Boise Fire Department. Let me introduce them. Our Division Chief of Operations, Hummel, our B Shift Battalion 1 Battalion Chief Tom Moore, and our B Shift Battalion 2 Battalion Chief Mike Walker. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here. So today we're really focused on the battalion chief role in our fire department and what that role looks like and the responsibilities you all have. Chief Hummel, you're recently a battalion chief a few years ago, now as our division chief of operations. So I'm going to kick this off to you first to kind of get us started. What is the role of a battalion chief within the Boise Fire Department?
Yeah, it's a bit of a change in mindset. It's a big change where you go from being part of a crew to being, supervising an entire battalion of crews. So it's exciting because you do have an opportunity to affect more than just one crew, but an entire battalion's culture. So, I mean, obviously, you're managing multiple resource incidents from an emergency perspective, but you're also, kind of a formalized mentor and hope for change when there's issues. And then, of course, you're kind of sandwiched between labor and management. So you're having to deliver messages up and down the chain of command.
So when you say you oversee multiple stations, how many stations do our battalion chiefs oversee?
Depends on the battalion, but I think 2nd Battalion has 6 stations and 7 companies. I think maybe 1st has 5 stations, 6 companies.
Yeah.
And I think as 3rd Battalion, 6 stations, 7 companies as well.
Perfect. So Tom, you were just on a fire. You just came into this podcast fresh off a fire. That role when you show up on scene, you're the incident commander overseeing the entire operation of that incident. Just walk the listeners through how that works from the time of dispatch you get on scene and what you're going through as an incident commander as that fire progresses or that emergency incident progresses.
So usually the battalion chief does not arrive first. Usually one of our engine companies is first, and they start to paint a picture of what's going on. They start making their initial assignments to other arriving companies. This morning, I was actually arrived on location first, so a little bit different. Started to make contact with the calling party, find out a little more information, and then make those initial assignments. But generally, an engine company arrives first. The captain establishes incident command. So when the battalion chief arrives, en route to the call, we're just gathering more information, listening to the radio as we're driving to the scene. Once we arrive, we try and get some situational awareness, what's going on. We get a transfer of command from that first in company, and then we come up with a game plan or continue that captain's game plan of how to stabilize the incident. So on this particular one, everything went smoothly. It was fire on a stove. It was put out relatively quick. Ventilation cleared out the rest of the building. And it was pretty quick work this morning.
So to maybe talk a little bit about, for the listeners of the podcast who are in the fire service, they're going to know exactly what you do and kind of how it rolls. But for the listeners that aren't, you get that initial tones to respond. You mentioned it already. You're driving a vehicle code 3. You're trying to listen to that radio to also get your picture painted in your head. What's that stress level like for you at times when there's so much going on, you're trying to manage a few things all at once?
It can get stressful. Your adrenaline definitely kicks in, so you have kind of a heightened sense of everything. But you are trying to take in as much information as you can. While, as you say, we're driving our vehicle. We're making sure we get there safely as well. But it's really about the amount of information we get from the onset, and then the reports we get from our company officers that really paint a picture of what's going on for us throughout the entire incident.
Through the years of the fire service, I think we're all considered the senior guys in the fire service, mainly because of our age. I'm sure the rookies have some other term for us, but there was a time where when we all first probably came in, there was probably a few good mentors out there, but it was a culture of kind of power as knowledge and all that kind of stuff. And there wasn't a lot of sharing of information to progress your career. Talk about your role coming up to a battalion chief and those that may have mentored you to help you get there. And now as a battalion chief, your obligation to mentor others to help them get to your spot.
When Chief Hummel and I came on, we came on together in May 1st, 1995, completely different culture. And as you alluded to, There was a philosophy of knowledge is power. I'm going to hoard the power. People at the low end of the totem pole were not allowed to have any information or to know things or provide input. And I'm really proud of our department that culture has changed. And we are developing people even earlier and earlier than I ever imagined. And we've got some absolutely fantastic people that are coming up through the ranks now that are going to do amazing things. I had a handful of mentors that helped me all the way through. I think it was most critical to have the mentors as I was becoming a captain, because now you're taking on a huge amount of responsibility it's the biggest step you take. From to that point in your career. And really the captains they're kind of the backbone of operations. They are the ones that make things work. And we need to do everything we can to develop those folks that are going to be moving to that position. And I think we've done a pretty good job. I think we are willing to treat someone who is younger like they actually have value and they're smart. You don't have to wait till you're 15 years on to actually have a brain. So we're doing a really good job with that. And I had a handful when I was doing it 15 years ago. There were less mentors out there, less people willing to share. And honestly, nothing against our predecessors, but the quality of individuals and mentors we have now is dynamite. I would agree. So the next generation is in good hands. And we'll continue to develop them.
Which I think means the department's in great hands, right? As you alluded to, with these great emerging leaders at the company officer level and even below that are moving towards it, the department's in great hands.
Yeah, which is good news for the position of battalion chief too, because we have some really solid captains that are starting their process to work up into battalion chief. And that's really incumbent upon us as battalion chiefs to develop them and make them better, prepare them for that. I think one of the changes in culture too from the old days was I don't want my successor to outshine me. Right. But I think if you're really truly a mentor and a leader, you want that.
You hope for it.
You want that person to outshine you. And I have no doubt, absolutely no doubt, that the next generation of battalion chiefs is going to make me look like I was, just elementary.
And I think we want that for every position, certainly mine included. You hope the next fire chief is way better than you are, and I'm probably in your camp with that one. I think let's go back to you, Mike. We talked about it a little bit, but what was your professional and even personal journey? Let's talk more about the personal journey, coming from firefighter to senior firefighter and then company officer. You mentioned it, and we've said it on this podcast before, that company officer role is probably the most critical role in the fire department. I think one of the most difficult roles is yours as battalion chiefs, because as Aaron alluded to, you're 1 foot in the line, you're 1 foot in administration, you're trying to navigate all those different demands and requests and needs. What did you have, if any, challenges personally going through that transgression in the ranks?
Well, I feel pretty fortunate because early on in my career, I kind of mapped out what I wanted to do. And for the most part, it's gone according to plan. I wanted to spend as much time as I could as a firefighter because I felt like that was a really fun position. But also, it's really good. I feel like it is the most valuable training ground to become a company officer because you're in the company officer's back pocket the whole time and you're watching what they do and you're learning. So I spent 8 years there, promoted to driver. I always had in my mind that I would like to go into training and took the test and got the opportunity. I spent 6 years there. Reluctantly, I was assigned and I agreed to running 4 of our recruit academies, which was one of the most valuable experiences I had in my career because it really solidified a lot of the task level skills that from our generation, we were not being trained the same way that they're being trained now. So it really shored up a lot of that task level stuff. So when I became a company officer, I could more effectively operate and train my crew. It also gave me so many other skills and experiences that have been hugely valuable. Leading a group of young men and women, discipline, organizing, and also seeing the view from outside of operations, which I think is really valuable. And it allowed me to see that there is so much more going on in the department than what you see when you just show up at the station, you know, every shift. So from there, after 6 years, I cut the cord and I went back to the line as a captain, which was really probably the funnest time I had. At Station 9, I had a great cruise all the way through, and being a part of that cohesive unit and training together, working together, living together was just really, really valuable, just fond memories of it. And then, of course, I thought, you know, I would like to be BC, and because of the opportunities that you have to have a little more influence, a little bit more ability to steer and guide, like not just your battalion, but one of the things that I really like about how we operate is under Chief Hummel and Chief Moore before him, the battalion chiefs have been empowered to really have a lot of influence over what happens in the department. And it makes sense because we have one foot, we are still engaged with all of the rank and file, and we know kind of what's going on. We have a view of admin. We are really well positioned to make really smart, intelligent decisions for the department. And I'm grateful that that's happened.
And y'all do a great job at it. But just as the transition goes, you're out of the group of three here. You're the newest battalion chief. What was the biggest surprise you had going from company officer to battalion chief? What's the one thing you didn't anticipate as you made that transition?
I'm going to give you two, if that's all right.
Okay.
So they always, everyone says that the administrative and personnel issues are going to dominate your time. And I'm like, yeah, I know that. But I was surprised by how many administrative and personnel issues I'm dealing with on a daily basis.
And not necessarily, just for the listeners, not necessarily these big, huge personnel issues, but just personalities, right?
No,
human beings, you know, supervising and leading human beings.
Yeah. Just little things like dealing with an issue on telestaff, or, you know, trying to, you know, coach someone on, like, you can't abandon your district just on your own. You know, little things like that. You're constantly dealing with things like that. My second item refers back to what Chief Moore was saying about going to fire, and what I was surprised was the fog of war. We have that as captains and company officers, but I feel absolutely blind sometimes when I show up at an incident, and that information gap and catching up to what's actually going on was surprising to me. We make a lot of assumptions about what is happening on the scene based on the reports we get, and we arrive and it's not quite what we see.
Right.
And we are really reliant on our companies to provide us really good information, because we're not going to be inside the building. We're not going to be on the back side of the building.
Yep.
We do try and get a walk around when we can, but we're really, you are so dependent on your folks for good information.
Depending on that information, yeah. Tom, you've been a BC for a while now, but I'll take you back. That transition, company officer to battalion chief, what was the biggest surprise for you that you thought, oh, I didn't know this was going to happen?
I 100% agree with Chief Walker on that, and probably the amount of time management or the lack of free time or just with dealing with stuff. I worked 10 years prior to being promoted to battalion chief. I was on Engine 5, which, you know, nonstop, kind of super busy. You fit things in as you can. I kind of mistakenly thought going to a battalion chief, I would be able to manage my time and have a lot more time to do different projects.
How many years in? How's that work for you?
So I think I'm a little over 5 years as the BC rank, and I'm still trying to figure it out because just as Chief Walker said, it's you're getting pulled different directions for different things. So you really have to be good at managing your time.
Let me ask you this too. Over 5 years, you've responded to those incidents as a battalion chief that weren't in your Rolodex. Mike alluded to these calls, right? That we can train for a lot of stuff. We can't train for everything. How did you handle mentally, even responding to that call that you had never had in your Rolodex? What was your thought process going to that call?
I think you fall back on, you know, our incident priorities. You know, everything is risk management.
Yep.
You risk a lot to save a lot, risk a little to save a little, basically, right? And then just knowing that to rely on your company officers, rely on your crews, because we've got some really great people out there that are really valuable. They have a wide variety of skills and knowledge, and being able to rely on them really helps a lot.
That was a great answer. That could be a test question for promotion. So for those listening that might promote, maybe listen to that part of it. That was great. Aaron, I'll ask you the same thing, but in a different context. You were a battalion chief, a senior battalion chief. I know when I got here 3 years ago, working through that. And then you made that big jump from battalion chief to division chief. I'd ask you the same question I asked Tom and Mike. What was your biggest surprise transitioning now from shift work to the day work and a higher level of responsibility?
Great question, and I actually have gotten that a few times. The big thing for me is a different kind of stress. As a battalion chief, I call it kind of an impending doom stress. If you have the right mindset as a battalion chief, and you recognize the gravity of the position that you hold, and that there's a lot of families depending on you to make a good decision at the right time, that's impending doom stress. You don't know what you're going to get woke up on in the middle of the night, and you hope that you're ready. I would be exhausted by the evening of day 2, even if we weren't busy as a bat chief. As an administrator, it's a different kind of stress. It's a whole nother level of volume being thrown at you. As a bat chief in the field, you have 2 days, and you're trying in those waking hours to meet the needs of your captains and your subordinates and deal with administrative things. Maybe it's even over a weekend, so you have limited ability to do things, at least with the office if they have to interact with us. So that was really challenging to get the administrative work done as a bat chief on shift in those 2 daytime hour pieces. As an administrator, it's actually, it's been pleasant in the sense that there's a lot of space and time to get those administrative duties done when you're working a 5-day work schedule. So it is a different kind of stress though. Instead, you trade the impending doom stress for the you'll never please anybody or everybody stress, and you'll never, ever, ever, ever empty your in basket. And if you don't have good time management skills, it's going to affect it will affect how good of a leader you are as far as effectiveness.
A little more 24/7 stress.
Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, I mean that is, it's a different type of stress, but yes, it's almost you never. It's hard to clock out sometimes.
I think for our listeners, you can hear from all 3 of those answers that level of responsibility. I think we all feel that accountability to do better for the organization. That in and of itself creates a little stress because you have high expectations of yourself and what we're doing. And that's a good stress, honestly. I think that if we're pushing ourselves to keep being better for the organization and ultimately the community, that's a good thing. But certainly can take a toll. In just a word, what keeps you up at night? Maybe 2 words or 3, but what keeps you up at night?
Worrying about the phone call I'm going to get that I don't want to get.
Yeah.
Something bad happened. Tom,
Battalion 1, what keeps you up at night?
Grass fire in the wildland urban interface.
Yeah.
Yep. Can see that. Mike?
Mayday.
Mayday, yeah. And we'll talk a little bit about Mayday because that is one of the most stressful, critical situations we could ever have on a fire ground. So with that, Mike, I'll go to you. And just a couple words. As a battalion chief, what are the biggest challenges you face? We maybe alluded to this a little bit earlier, but day to day as a battalion chief, what are the biggest challenges you face kind of day to day?
Balancing the workload.
Yeah.
Really, it's because Chief Hummel has a great analogy. He calls it being in the blender. You show up at work, and there's been so many days where I've shown up, I'm like, all right, nothing on the schedule. I'm going to get a lot done.
Yeah.
And you show up, and in the first half hour, it's completely blown because you've got all these different phone calls and surprise meetings and stuff like that. And that, not that you've ever
I heard an accusation.
Your day is just completely dictated. You don't have control of your day. And so to get all the things you have to get done is really challenging. That's probably the biggest challenge I have. Because on top of the surprise you get from different things, like this morning we had a change to the training schedule that required some work to shift people around, dealing with things like that. There's a telestaff issue or staffing issue. There's one thing or another happens and you got to deal with it. And then you throw on top of that, a call comes in and we have to respond. You have to drop everything and go.
And I think for our listeners, non-fire listeners, when we talk about things like moving the schedule around, moving people around, it sounds simplistic, right? I often say the fire service is simple in its mission and very complex in its delivery, right? It takes a lot of things to move the pieces of a
you're
large
getting
organization.
Sorry.
Nope, you're good.
They just
That's
asked you
my
to
best
confirm I
line
was
right there, too.
He was
Question again.
dispatch battalion too. Yeah, Tom talks about the grass fire.
yeah, totally.
The most chaotic responses I've had were grass fires because you're not only are you trying to listen to the radio, figure out where it's at, how to get there, are the right resources going?
Right.
You're getting phone calls from the BLM. You're maybe getting a phone call from another BC who is trying to help you out and solve problems.
You got geography challenges, you got wind-driven challenges, you got all these things.
You got to be thinking about code red notifications. You got to be thinking about a
Comm
comm plan,
plan.
a staging area. There's just
Yeah, controlling the response so it doesn't get funneled into the wrong place.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's get back to the questions. We've alluded to Maydays, and certainly from a command officer standpoint, the Mayday is the one thing we never want to have to deal with. It's, for our listeners, it's when we have a firefighter in trouble that we need to it's an incident within an incident. So Chief Hummel, maybe walk the listeners through a Mayday, how stressful that can be, but more importantly, how we operate through that Mayday to ensure the safety of our firefighters.
So Mayday, lost, trapped, or injured firefighter, we're kind of modifying our policy a little bit. So just because someone has an injury doesn't mean it's a Mayday. If you have, it's basically what makes it so stressful is we're used to day in and day out, responding to the public's needs and looking to help them with their problem. It's pretty abnormal for us to have one of our people have a problem that we now need to put into our set of priorities and address that. So when you hear Mayday, Mayday, Mayday come over the radio, it's a very stressful thing as a bat chief. A guy named Don Abbott did a series of Mayday studies, and they looked at historically what was causing them, when were they happening. And at the end of the report, he had a few quotes that were in there. And one of the quotes that really stuck with me was, and these are quotes from people that actually managed significant line of duty death Maydays. One of the ones was, it spoke loudly to me as a bat chief that went through a Mayday line of duty that said, oh, if you think that you're ready for a Mayday, trust me, you're not. So it doesn't matter how much prep you do, you're not emotionally going to be ready for that. And I've had certainly in the time that I was a bat chief, I've had a handful of incidents that really were stressful, got your attention. And so anytime, in my opinion, the best way to deal with that as a bat chief is you can't just wing it when you get there. Right. We're going to default to our training, and that's why we try to prioritize that in our battalion chief training and our battalion chief academies. But you have to have a plan, and we can't plan for everything. You can't communicate when there's an open mic and screaming on it, and you don't have the ability. That kind of messes up your plan, And so, but all we can do is the best we can, which is really rehearse. The way I like to do it is kind of segment out packages of, depending on the nature of the Mayday, how I'm going to react and in what order I'm going to do things. And then you rehearse those again and again. And honestly, I actually went through a number of Mayday rehearsals in my mind when I was on shift, oftentimes laying in bed at night, getting ready to try to go to sleep, because you have that impending doom stress. You don't know when it's going to happen. It could happen tonight in the middle of the night. And am I ready for that? So I would dream up different scenarios that I potentially could be faced with and think through with all my faculties and not a reptile brain. I would think through how would I manage that unknown screaming radio traffic type thing? How am I going to systematically organize a response to that, and in what order? So
I think we've done, certainly like most fire departments across the country, we have done things to mitigate the chances of a Mayday. It's strategies, it's tactics, how we deploy into a fire, all of that. But to your point, you can't account for everything. And so I think the training, as we do, is the best way to be prepared for it.
Well, we know the leading cause of death is cardiac events, right? So can't really train for that, short of having, good tactics and strategies. Sometimes those events are going to occur, and it's an absolute emergency when it does. How are you going to react to that as an IC in the fire ground? And one of the things that I like to say is, you're not documenting in your tactical command sheet because you don't have control of the incident today. or that moment, you're documenting so that when it escalates out of control in the next 5 minutes, that you have something to default to. We're calling that extra alarm on an instant, not necessarily because we don't have the people to deal with what's in front of us, but you have to have some sort of tactical reserve so that when that event within an event comes in, you're ready to be able to handle that.
So Tom, your past experience, you had some dispatch experience prior to coming to Boise Fire. As an incident commander now, how important is that connection and relationship to the dispatch center, especially in a critical incident?
I think it's helped me a lot over the years, just understanding kind of how the dispatch center works, what the dispatchers are going through. They truly are kind of left in the dark a lot. They don't know all the details of what's going on. They have limited information. And when there is a big incident, it gets very busy and stressful for them as well. So it's given me a real understanding of how things affect them, as you know, and then when I ask for assistance with them, kind of have, I think, a better understanding of, okay, it might take them a minute because they're pretty busy and things are very stressful for them as well.
Yeah, I think sometimes, especially with our newer generation that maybe hasn't spent time in a dispatch center, to see how that works on their end. It's stressful for you. It's equally stressful for them, especially because they're helpless. They're not there. They're sometimes however many miles away.
And they're hearing the same radio traffic we're hearing, but we're getting a lot more information about what's going on and have some semblance of control, hopefully, over the situation.
Yeah.
But them being so far removed, they get the stress and don't really have a way, like any way to see how it's being resolved.
But as a battalion chief, they're pretty critical to you because they're providing you even updates on how long it's been since you're first arriving, or
Yes.
some of those time frames. They're getting that back to you as a battalion chief. Where, to your point, Aaron, about you got so many things going on in your head, you might miss that, and so that's a critical resource even to help on an
Definitely.
incident. So we'll wrap this up. It's been about 30 minutes. Really appreciate all your time. Really talking about that role of battalion chief, some of the stress and anxiety that you guys face on a daily basis. But I think you all could nod and say it's a very rewarding position to be in.
Mhm.
I know certainly there's times where you probably look back and say, I'd love to be back doing that job. But I'll wrap it up this way, and I'll just start with you, Mike, and we'll go down. I mentioned at the start of this that we're probably the more senior leaders in the department, right? You've been around a while. You've had a lot of experiences. I know a lot of times we get asked, what's the worst thing you've ever seen? We really don't want to talk about that. But it's natural for people to ask. So I'll ask it this way. Throughout your career so far to date, what's been one of the most memorable things you've had happen to you in the fire department throughout your career so far?
I'm going to take it from this standpoint, like most significant, like one of the,
Sure.
I guess would be most memorable, but being assigned to be in charge of the recruit academy. Didn't want it, but I became the guy.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for it, and it is one of the highlights of my career. I loved training the new guys, and I felt like it was very rewarding personally. There was a lot of responsibility, and myself along with the folks that helped me. I feel like we did a decent job of prepping these new guys to come in, and really when I see what the recruits are doing now that were in my academies, I'm like a proud dad.
Proud moment.
Yeah, they're knocking it out of the park.
Very cool. Tom, what about you? Most memorable so far through the career?
There's so many different things that you remember and things that you don't want to remember, but and you try and learn something from every bit. Probably my most memorable would be the Oregon Trail fire.
Mm-hmm.
Just it's stuff that I had only seen on TV or read about in the past, and then it's happening right here in Boise, where we have a whole block of houses on fire, wind-driven event, so fire spreading quickly to other houses, and everybody. It's kind of like we fell back on our training, and everybody just stepped up, and things kind of ran smoothly, which I would expect total chaos, but overall everything. Everybody worked well together. Everything. It was an unfortunate event, and.
Right.
But that's probably, I think back on that a lot as, hey, we do work well together. We, the way we train for major incidents actually works.
So there's a saying that the more, the bigger the incident, the more we do go back to the core of what we do, right? We don't overthink things. Your experience, is that pretty true? The bigger the incident, the more chaotic, the more we just get back to the core. It's the priorities that you guys have alluded to. It seems like I've seen that throughout my career. It sounds like that was your experience.
Yeah, from the beginning, Recruit Academy. When I started, I had zero fire experience. I had some law enforcement dispatching experience, EMS experience. I was an EMT and rode on ambulances for several years prior to coming here, but zero fire experience. And throughout the Recruit Academy and the training, we do a lot of repetitive stuff, and it's like, you kind of think, why are we doing this? I've done this 100 times, right? But when you are in the stressful situation and it's overwhelming, you fall back on that, and it's second nature. And that's the reason we do it. You fall back and everything works the way it's supposed to work.
Sir, and I'll finish with you. You've had some time to think about it now. Just most memorable for you so far throughout your career?
Well, I mean, anytime you do this job for any period of time, we're going to have horrible memories we don't want to remember that you couldn't make a difference on. I'm sure I've worked on well over 100 people that didn't make it. The ones that are real challenging to me that I could think back as numerous fatality fires, that the window of opportunity for rescue was so small that it didn't have a good outcome.
Yep.
And yet every day in this city, we have people doing drills all over the place, prepping for that moment when you get that opportunity that you can hopefully execute. And I can think of a couple rescues that came out that were favorable, where the timing was right, we were notified fast enough, we had units, the closer units were not already on other calls, we were able to get there and actually execute what we had trained to do so many times. We were able to pull someone out of a fire and actually have them survive that event without deficit. So I can think of a couple different events that were really notable for me in that, and gratifying that we finally got a chance where the timing worked out to where we could do what we had trained so many times to do.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you guys for joining us. I know it's been a little bit interesting with the earpiece in your ear and some calls going on. That is the life of a battalion chief. So I really appreciate you taking the time and joining us, and have a great shift. Thanks, Boise, for tuning in. We hope you join us next month for another exciting episode of the Mission Strong podcast.